So I was sitting here looking over this weekend's planetary qualifiers, the results, the decks that are being played, and I started to see a very similar trend in terms of the statistics from our new top deck Han Yellow and our old top deck / decks in Boba Fett. And I started to think, okay, what did they actually talk about when they were suspending Boba? What was the exact wordings that they used? Because if you all remember, in this article with Boba Fett, well, they also mentioned that they're going to be doing another update in March 2025. And they're going to be doing updates every few months, basically at the start of presumably every new set. Are we going to see new bans, new balance changes, maybe even some marauding of cards? And so this started to kind of creep into my mind because Han is truly in terms of stats, really starting to push into Boba territory. And so I wanted to compare Boba Fett to Han and whether or not we're actually going to see balance changes and potential bannings of certain cards to get some preparation and also just to kind of start the discussion, because we've already talked about Han and we've talked about DJ and we've talked about tech and the overall community, I guess you could say, preference, and that is that something should be done about the tech DJ combo. But whether that's banning Han or changing DJ or changing the rules interaction is still up for debate, and that's where the comparison between the old reasonings for why Boba Fett was suspended needs to be compared against the new stats for Han. So to start us out, and we'll talk about all the stats right now for Han, but first we got to figure out why they banned Boba Fett in the first place. And you can see here, one of the first things that they mentioned is that the first set of planetary qualifiers, Boba Fett decks represented 40% of top 8 and more than 55% of winners. And they say that's far above the line of an acceptable metagame share for a single leader. So the question is, if it's far above the acceptable metagame, what would be an acceptable metagame? Is this 20% of top 8 finishers and 30% of winners? Or is that still above the acceptable metagame? Obviously, 55% of winners and 40% of your top 8 decks, literally 40% of the actual watchable matches, generally speaking. Of course, there's going to be intermediate rounds beforehand, but 40% of the final top 8 matches that are generally shown on camera were Boba Fett decks, which is a crazy stat. Again, we don't know what their baseline is. Would they have banned Boba Fett if it was 30% of top 8 finishers and 40% of winners? Probably. That's probably still too much. So we don't really know what the baseline is. All I know is that, yes, it absolutely was a significant percentage. But then they get a little bit more specific because they talk about, kind of their whole idea behind it. We've went over this previously, right? But they specifically mentioned Boba Fett. Why did they ban Boba Fett specifically? Well, they say the cunning command villain archetype is one of the most powerful archetypes at the time. Clearly, the cunning portion of that is just exceptionally strong because it continues to come back and come back and come back. Now, they obviously printed specific synergy cards for Boba Fett, whereas Han and Sabine and these types of cards don't really have specific synergy cards nearly to the same degree. I mean, they have synergy cards, but they don't have, like, in name, when you play this and you have a Boba Fett leader, really, or when you have a Sabine leader, those things don't really exist. Obviously, Boba Fett specifically had those cards, but more importantly, they mentioned why specifically they picked Boba Fett in these 2 paragraphs, basically claiming that their stat line for Boba Fett really didn't get adjusted after their initial playtesting of very early design concepts. They didn't really reduce the stat line, as he was an outliner. The first and only 5 resource to flip 4/7 is exceptionally powerful and way overstated, as we've all gone over a lot. This is all stuff that you might have you might be saying, oh wait, isn't this familiar? Like, haven't we already talked about all this? But more importantly, this is important to note because how does it compare to Han? Han doesn't have this exceptional stat line. In fact, he's a little bit undersized. He's a, 6 to flip 4-6. Now, you might say that's not really accurate because he oftentimes will come down on the prior turn due to his action. So he's kind of like a 5 resource 4-6, still not an overstated leader. But then they also talk about how there have been so many different combinations. They say that they see evidence of Boba Fett as adaptable and powerful enough to lead all 4 base colors with Boba Fett. And the fact that he was already a top archetype in the prior set as well, before additional printings to help him out. And you could say the same thing about Han. Han Green, exceptionally powerful deck, multiple top 8 finishes. Han Yellow, obviously the key one, but we've even seen Han Reds and Han Blues in the top 8s in the meta so far. So Han definitely has spanned all 4 base colors. Not that Han Blue and Han Red are particularly strong. The Han Red stronger than Han Blue, Han Green stronger than both of those, and then Han Yellow the strongest of them all. But it at least is capable of bringing all of those combinations into the top 8. And Han Yellow was also a top contender in set 2 when this article was printed. We had a lot of people claiming that Double Yellow Han was the best deck of set 2. And it did perform. It was one of the decks that you had to think about from set 2. So the question is he a problem eater? Is this something that will actually get Han banned? And for that, we kind of have to take a look at Han's stats right now. And I have to say a big thank you to the developers over at Star Wars Unlimited Competitive Hub, because it basically takes away all of my work for me, and I can just look at this site and tell you all what's going on. First off, if you look at just the leader base combination, Han Yellow is 28% of winners. But if you just look at Han, which is what they were doing in that article, he is approaching 40% of the winners of planetary qualifiers. 20 total. Why? Because we have Han Greens winning tournaments. If we scroll down, we got a Han Blue up here, right? Han Blue, we've got Han Greens, we got Han Tarkin Towns, and we have Han Yellows. So we're seeing all 4 base combinations pulling out wins just as Boba was. Not a single other leader on this list even comes really close, right? Quinlan, I shouldn't say even close, because Quinlan is reasonably close. If you had Quinlan Yellow here, he would also have all 4 leader archetypes. We have Quinlan Blue, Quinlan Red, and Quinlan Green. Django has Django Red and Django Yellow. I believe maybe Django Blue up here. I can't remember. I don't think so if I'm just doing a quick scan. So really, it's just Quinlan and it's just Han who are performing to this level in versatility, but Quinlan does not nearly have the results that Han does. Less, around a fourth of the same percentage of the meta that Han does. So if you just look in terms of the winnings, Han in general is probably approaching that level of being way too dominant. I would absolutely say that while 55% with Boba is insane and shouldn't happen, 38% is definitely over the line. And I would probably put it in the unacceptable range, at least in terms of my perspective, of FFG's perspective, if that makes sense. FFG has to evaluate what's okay for their game, and I imagine 38% is a little bit too high for their metrics. But then what about the 40% of the top 8 meta? Because we know Boba Fett was 55% of the winners, and Han in general is actually approaching that. It gets more and more by the week. And so did Boba, by the way. Boba got more and more as we progress further into the planetary qualifiers because people realized that Boba Fett was as strong as he is. So what about the top 8s? Well, this is where I think there's a lot of conversation to be had. Because if you look at the top 8, Han suddenly becomes a very reasonable 17.7% of the top 8 in terms of leader base and 22% of the leaders in top 8 meta. Not something that's to be overlooked, right? It's definitely a significant portion and could still be above the acceptable lines for FFG, but it's not nearly close to the 40% that Boba Fett was. So still significantly lower. Significantly lower. But again, is this something that FFG deems unacceptable? Well, that's something that I think could be unacceptable, because it's important to realize that they also mentioned one other thing when they mentioned Boba Fett ban and to return to this kind of reevaluating the meta in March. And you see here, implementing this Boba Fett suspension, we're well aware of other powerful cards and decks putting pressure on the metagame. For instance, Sabine Wren and ECL. Based on our internal discussions and playtesting, we expect these decks to be strong but fair. If these aggressive archetypes rise to the top, we're confident the player base has the tools to target them effectively. There are already a number of strong decks which can be tuned to have good matchups. We also expect to see significant metagame shakeups with the releases of Set 4 and Set 5. Okay, so they already mentioned that Sabine and ECL were going to be looked at. And remember, Sabine had even lower, if I remember correctly, a percentage of the meta, or around the same percentage. It was definitely like number 2, or around that, like number 2 to 4 best deck in the format after Boba Fett overall. But this is something that they were going to take a look at. They were going to take a look at because they were worried potentially, and maybe just providing a little bit of early reassurance to the player base that considered Sabine to be the next best deck, so it was going to take over the format. Well, Han definitely has surpassed her in terms of overall percentage, and it may be that we will see some sort of change reflected for Han in the next ban announcement. And the question is Han going to get banned, or is something else going to happen? Because they also talked about why Boba Fett specifically, and they mentioned that if they were going to be banning cards in the Boba Fett archetype, they're going to have to continuously come back to Boba Fett because of his overstated leader body and the fact that his ability was just so strong that it's probably not going to just remove him from the meta. As they say here, the fact that Boba Fett was already a top archetype, and then they printed more things that work with him. Heck, they're printing more things with the new Fett's Fire Spray. Attempting to remove cards around him would carry serious risk of Boba Fett decks continue to be top tier and push out other options. So the question is, okay, will they ban something within Han? And I don't necessarily think that that's going to be the case. I don't expect them to be banning Tech or DJ, which is oftentimes the cards that people associate with Han. I don't think they're going to be looking at Han Solo Unit or Enfys Nest. I don't think they're going to be looking at Plo Koon necessarily. All these cards, some of them are extremely strong, right? Plo Koon, very strong card, excellent card in like Quinlan, for example, but there's not that many decks playing it. And what truly makes a lot of these cards as strong as they are is Han Solo as a leader. You're not seeing Enfys Nest and Han Solo Unit and Kira and all these types of cards proliferate throughout all of the decks. Heck, even Quinlan, you're not really seeing a lot of decks dive in and try to pick up a lot of the cards that you're seeing that Han is playing. And of course, I picked the one deck that's not working. Here's a little bit of an image. People are playing, okay, 3 of Han Solo, no of Enfys Nest. Some decks are playing things like Enfys Nest, no Han Solos. Some aren't even playing any of them in of its entirety. So it's definitely something that Han Solo improves versus those cards being particularly strong. So I don't see a ban outside of Tech or DJ, probably DJ specifically, as a target of a ban. But even DJ, again, you don't see this guy in any other list besides Han decks. That's the only list that works, and it's mainly because of that interaction with Han's ability in of itself. And so, let's say you don't ban Han, let's say you don't ban DJ, it comes March, and guess what? There's going to be a whole new set printed, and what does Han's leader ability do? I spoke about this back in set 1, but Han as a leader is going to be the leader that makes every single set work with him, because all he does is give you more resources. And that is such a powerful ability that every single set you're probably going to have to reevaluate where Han is. And maybe he's not too strong right now, which is kind of where I lean. I don't think it's necessary for a ban. I do think it's something that if the player base does want it, then there could be a consideration for it because of just the mass unpopularity of this. But it's something that is worth talking about, because while I don't necessarily think it is bannable or worthy of a ban right now, as we're seeing with a pretty reasonable spread of the meta and the ability for other decks to compete, which Boba Fett really pushed out of the meta, well, next set, is it going to get even worse? Is the set after going to get even worse than that? I know they said there's going to be major meta shakeups in set 4 and set 5, and I don't doubt that. But is the major meta shakeups going to push Han even further above the rest? Or is it going to be in that same spot where he is now? Because it's really important to notice that even with sets coming and going, the decks that were already good still are pretty good for the most part. Things like Sabine Green, for example, didn't really get anything from set 3. Things like Boss Green didn't really get a ton from set 3. Things like Palpatine or Ray Reds. Like, there are some cards, right, that battle against some of the set 3 cards, but the overall strategy of a lot of these decks are still the same. And so I don't think Han Yellow is going to get pushed out of the meta for sure. I still think he'll be one of the best decks to contend with, even without seeing the full of set 4, just because I don't believe that a set can really change it that much. Again, I could be wrong because I've been playing with some of those set 4 cards and they're pretty strong. But there's a good chance the opposite will happen, which is, oh, Han's going to get even better. Han is going to get even better because every single card you have to look in the context of what happens if I play this a turn earlier, because Han can do that every single time. Every 7 resource play that you see is, okay, yes, it's 7 resources, but is this going to win me the game if I get it down on the battlefield 2 turns earlier because Han can do that? Maybe. And so this might be worthy of a ban coming in March. And mind you, this is the thing that they're going to be doing. And of course, I have all the other tabs open from all the clicking of Quinlan decks. But this is going to be something that they're going to be doing every single time in terms of update announcements. We're going to be getting a metagame update every couple of months, or every few months, I should say, as they say here, March 2025, but then update again every few months after that. Probably around every single set release is what I'm expecting. Every single set release, as that is what it lines up for. I'll say it's probably a little bit better to go ahead and wait for the set to release for a little while to see what the metagame looks like before you make any changes, but I'm not FFG, so I'm not going to make that decision. But I do think that this might be something that they'll have to look at. In fact, I'm almost certain that they're already looking at this because of the community feedback. But it's definitely something that they could be considering to put on their ban list already. And so this is something that I think we should be preparing for, taking a look at, and definitely voicing our opinions about whether it should be or shouldn't be. But it is definitely something on their list, as we are expecting a ban update announcement or a metagame update or a rules update, whatever you want to call it, in March. We know it's happening because they say it here. And the things that they mention about Boba Fett, not all of them apply, but a good chunk of them do. And if we see the same trend of Han Solo for the rest of the set 3 meta, we could definitely see him reaching that 55% of the winners and 40% of top 8 finishers. Remember, when we talked about set 3 planetary qualifier meta, Han Yellow wasn't even, if I remember correctly, more than 1 win compared to every other deck. Sabine Green was the top. As the metas went by, or as the weeks went by, Han Yellow started to creep up, match Sabine, surpass Sabine, and then now is dwarfing Sabine in terms of stats. I do not doubt that there is potential for him to get even more dominant as more and more people pick him up and attempt to play him, as they think he's the best chance that they have to perform well and to win. And so all this to say, I think that we will see some sort of change in March. And I think that there is a very good chance that Han will be looked at and potentially banned, or something in his deck be removed. It is something about these problem leaders, and there might be worth a whole video here. Leaders like Han, leaders like Boba Fett, leaders like new Han, the set 2 Han, these leaders that can cheat cost, these leaders that can give you just natural advantages across any set, universally strong leaders. Same thing with Sabine, also very aggressive, very static ability in terms of just guaranteeing you damage. These types of leaders are potentially problematic in the future. Now, for this set, we don't see set 2 Han all that much, but he is someone that definitely will pop up and still has popped up here and there. He's just out of the top meta, so there may not be a problem with him, and there may not be a problem with OG Han, but it's definitely going to be looked at, and it may be suspended. And as they say, it is suspended. It is not banned, but at least for the purposes of playing him in competitive format, he is banned for the current moment, and they may choose to unsuspend Boba, and the same thing may happen with OG Han. We don't know. And to be honest, we don't know anything guaranteed. This is just speculation and more of just conversation around the topic, because it is starting to get very close to the reasons that they mentioned about Boba Fett. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you think this is something that will reasonably happen? Do you want Han to be banned? I know a lot of you don't like Tech and DJ, but what about Han himself? Is it just the Tech DJ combo, or is it the fact that Han himself as a leader is problematic in your opinion? I'm curious to see. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.